Welcome to the Soulful Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Analisa, Broadway actor turned coach for big dreamers. This is a show about choosing to live inside out, becoming sourced from within, and then acting upon your deepest longings. From starting your dream business to starring on Broadway, from sacred activism to being a radiant, aligned parent and everything in between, we will walk the razor's edge of these two seemingly contradictory words, soulful ambition. This podcast is here to awaken the longing in your chest that is so big it threatens to swallow you whole. Because the manifestation of your true desires is your destined path and the medicine and the magic that the world needs. This is Soulful Ambition. Welcome back to the Soulful Ambition podcast. And I'm really excited to welcome Molly Noerenberg to the podcast today. Molly we're in good company because all of you have probably listened to Maria Fiella on the podcast before 2 times. And Maria is the one who voice messaged me one random day this last winter and said, I have somebody you need to know, and told me about you. And then you also said that we have connections with Beth Clayton and with Elena Shadow, other guests on the podcast. So welcome, Molly. We have become Voxer friends. If you don't know the app, everybody, it's a voice messaging app, but we've become quick Voxer friends and just really happy that you're here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's such a thrill. I'm so excited.
So looking at understanding your background, obviously, as people hear, they'll go, okay, of course, you two have so much in common. You need to know each other. But I wonder if you might just share a little bit of your story and weave into how it brings you today to the work that you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah. So like yourself, I'm a singer and a performer, and I went to school for that. I went to Carnegie Mellon undergrad and NYU grad, and actually post-grad too, learning vocal pedagogy. And I always knew that I wanted to be a performer and a teacher. So that was part of my vision from the beginning. And I performed in the city and on a few tours. And I came back to the city in between gigs and would be working in sort of jobs that really weren't fulfilling me and were kind of eating away at me. And eating away is probably dramatic. They just weren't fulfilling me. And I was like, well, maybe it's a good time in between gigs to go back to school and learn vocal pedagogy and start a voice studio. So I went down that hole. But as soon as I went into the voice teaching realm, I pretty much did some gigs on the side, but I became a full-time voice teacher pretty instantaneously. And so I had my own studio, and then I joined forces with a friend of mine, and we ran the NYC vocal studio for 10 years. And in that time, I also worked at NYU as a voice professor for 10 years. And in that time, this is where we interweave, especially in all the ways, it really became apparent to me that the people who were coming in to take lessons, I wanted to talk about their voice and I wanted to work on singing, but it was the human standing in front of me who was working through problems with their families or their friends or living in the city or just being in this industry in general. And I kept asking questions that would open cans of worms and would take us into these bigger discussions. And it just became very apparent to me. It was well, yes, it's still singing and music, but so much of my soul comes alive when I'm able to meet people in the middle of whatever they're moving through, in the muck, right? And so then I trained as a life coach and started a business on the side of the voice studio and on the side of NYU, and sort of was just piecing it together. And it sort of just naturally evolved that more of my people became coaching clients, and there was still singing involved, but it just sort of naturally progressed that this was the space that I was meant to be in.
So yeah, so many similarities. I felt the exact same way teaching voice. And also in shows, I'd be talking to my castmates and it's that's where we would go. People knew if they were sitting next to me in the dressing room or backstage, we're going to go deep.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't do well just like talking about the weather, although I love the weather, but like I want to know the depths of your soul and what's really going on. And that's like, I think that's where you and I have had this kindred relationship right from the beginning. It was like, even our first Voxer, it was like, let's just drop in. Let's talk about the real stuff because that's really what we're here to do.
Yeah. Okay. And so life coaching, but then how life coaching to the embodiment work that you're doing, and then also the work that you're now doing with the voice. What are you doing with the voice now?
Yeah. So actually, it was like an interesting time. We both had babies in the spring of 2020.
Yeah.
An interesting time to become a mom.
We could do a whole podcast on that.
I know. It's like a whole bunch that we could talk about there. And in the fall of 2020, even though it was all remote, I was basically kind of like living my dream. So I had been invited to, this was my second year doing this. I was teaching a vocal pedagogy lecture at NYU. So I was teaching a lecture class, running the studio, had a baby after we went through a fertility journey to have my son. And so it was like all the pieces that I really wanted were coming together. It was coaching, it was all this stuff. But inside, I just felt like heavy. It was like I felt the joy in each of the moments, but there was like an overarching heaviness that was kind of like in my body. And then a business coach and friend of mine happened to post on her story, like, I found this practice. It like changed my life. If you want to do, they have a free intro if you want to try this weekend. And I was just like, sure, let's do it. Zoom, signed up. And almost like instantaneously after the intro, once I took the first class, I knew like something major was shifting inside of me. And even it's like, I put on a very brave face. I'm very good at kind of like holding together all the details. And my teacher and dear friend and mentor, Tracy, I think it was either the first class, maybe the second class, like just said, from seeing my body move, she said, you don't like, I can see how much you've had to carry and you can put it down in here. Mm-hmm. And it was like this whole process that just let me like start to piece by piece, really come back home to myself through my body, which has opened up this whole other chapter, right? Because it's like, from that place, I can breathe. Like I can actually be myself. And through this process and through that practice, I really have found a way of like deeply connecting to, I'm a deep feeler. That's like one of my card carrying, but I've connected to my emotions and my feelings in a way where they feel so empowering and so insightful and so full of wisdom instead of like this big backpack of like rocks that I have to carry. And so through being able to dance with and move with the emotions that are actually up, I've been able to honor like what's really here and what am I really lit up to do. And in this process, it's interesting. So Ishtara, it's a moving meditation practice set to music. And what's really fascinating as a musician is like the whole point of it is actually to not be driven by the music. So it's to listen to your body in the context of music, which is really fascinating because we are trained to like dance on the beat and be very precise with rhythm. And it was such like a really eye-opening, unlocking process for me to be able to tune into like the wisdom of what music was telling me through my body. Mm-hmm. And I think it's through that process that I really came back to, yes, I want to coach people. Yes, I want to help them unlock things that are happening in their mind. But also music has this like unexplainable power to touch the parts that like cannot be necessarily spoken just in words, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this like other piece that allows it all to like a fabric to come back together and to kind of like even touch some of the pains and the points that like our brains might say like, I don't know why I feel this way, or I don't know what this is, but like I feel it. And the music and my body are kind of like affirming that I feel it. So there's something here for me to move and understand.
Yeah. Oh gosh, the music in my personal practice as well is so huge. Also through embodiment work as well. It's interesting. And now I'm like, we also started this journey around the same time too of going away. Cause that's when I was teaching for AMDA at that time with a teeny tiny baby. and had my own voice students. And then I started doing paradox process training and then rewilding. And so interesting timing. And part of me is like, was it becoming a mom? What if it was becoming a mom? What if it was the pandemic? What if it was, that it was like more. Oh gosh, I could go and I have a lot more thoughts on that. But the thing about music, and I'm glad that you bring this up because people can start playing with this today. It's like adding in music, right?
Yeah.
It makes me think about church and how like the music in the church was always the most powerful part for me.
Me too.
Or how going to the symphony can feel like going to church.
Going to church. I always said that. I was like, this is church.
Yeah. Interesting.
Two things that you just said I want to say. One is I actually went to Catholic high school, and so I would sing in a lot of funerals, but weddings and different occasions. And I was at a funeral this winter for a family member, and I was remembering, like it was coming back to me in such a visceral way, the feeling of like, I had a teacher that used to say singing is praying twice. And I was like, oh, like sitting in the church. And in high school, I was like, I got it.
Yeah.
But like sitting there at 41, I was like, no, that really is what it is. And it really does touch these other parts and connect us to something bigger and greater than our minds can fully conceive of, but that also we like know when it's happening. Like it feels like knowing. You're like, oof, there's something more here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My voice teacher in high school gave me this handout, and I'm going to look for it, you all, because I have it somewhere. I'm going to share it. But she was like, every time before you practice, you look at this. And she really planted some deep seeds in me. And the very first one was like, how fortunate I am that in this life I get to create beauty with music. And like you saying that just now reminded me of that. How fortunate we are to get to like feel the vibrations through this instrument and create these sounds and tones that you can't with spoken word.
Right.
It's incredible. And so how do you bring this into those who don't identify as singers? Because I imagine there are a lot of those people listening right now, and I don't want you to tune out because you're like, okay, this is going to be a voice-focused podcast. So bring us in, Molly.
Yeah. So one thing, it's like really funny. I go back and forth if I even want to only cater to singers. This is like my age-old conundrum where I'm like, are these only my people? Because singing is something that every person with a voice is able to do for their own healing. And so to me, it feels like a shame that it's something that feels like it's reserved for those who feel talented, because it's like, that's actually not how the voice is even designed. And if you are attracted to music and if you feel a calling towards it, it is there for you. And actually, it's like sometimes people who are not trained in singing, I feel like feel more free to use it in a more expressive, communicative way, because there aren't all these rules around what it should be or what's right or what's pretty or, all of those things. And so I feel like one, it's just like starting with the permission that like anyone with a voice, singing and music can be there for us to literally express our feelings. And this science that I heard actually through Ishtara just like blew my mind. And I was like, this is exactly it. Emotions are moved physiologically with breath, movement, and sound. That's how we alchemize an emotion. And so it's like, if that's what we're doing with singing, it's literally right there for everyone. It's not reserved for like, you can move an emotion if you can do it pretty. It's like, no, it's just moving an emotion. If that's something you care to do, you have that right there inside of you.
So good.
Yeah.
So what does your voice work look like now?
Yeah. So now I basically do one-on-one coaching. And within the one-on-one coaching, anyone that's doing one-on-one coaching with me, we do twice a month voice. I call it authentic voice calls. And it's basically where I put together a voice experience where everyone sings on mute. So it's actually not, it's like, you're not actually supposed to make sound for other people. It's sound for yourself, exploring making sound, exploring vibration, what it feels like. And really what I try to do is tie together the lessons that we're exploring in coaching, like who am I? What's my impact on the world? What matters to me? What makes my heart break? What brings me alive? I've done some that are rooted around like connecting to the chakra energies and using the voice at the same time, right? It's like bringing together all these worlds that like seemingly are supposed to like feel separate. They're in like different camps, but using the voice as a through line to connect us. Because also it's like the way we learn anything is through embodiment, right? But like vocal embodiment is also one of those things, right? So it's like we won't learn a lesson simply by our brain like understanding it. Key component, very important. And if we can make something with that lesson with our body and with our voice, it will literally like fast forward time on how quickly we can implement change with it. Mm-hmm. So I bring it in that way, and I'm just sort of like each week using it as a laboratory of like what else can we explore and what else can we create that the voice can kind of like accelerate the learning on.
That's so cool and unique and like different. And so what are you seeing? Like, what are you seeing people experience through this work?
Yeah. Well, one, it's really interesting because I feel like the first line of defense is like, there are so many rules. Like there are so many rules around how we're allowed to express. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like dropping in this way is interesting because I'm basically saying like, there's no rules. Yeah. And being presented, pretty regularly that like our brains serve up like, but it's only okay if it looks like this, or it's only okay if it sounds like this. And I feel like that's sort of like, that is the dismantling that we're trying to do, right? Like in all components. And so it's really fascinating because it's like a double way of learning, right? Because it's like we're undoing who I'm allowed to be as a human, but also like what sounds I'm allowed to make. And then it's so fascinating because like if we go through an experience, by the end, people will be saying like, oh, when I sang it the first time, it felt like kind of difficult, or I was worried about my technique, or this felt hard. By the end, if I'm like the chakra week, I felt just like free. I felt like energy. I felt like I could just exist, and it was something like bigger than me, and I was connecting to something bigger than me. And it's like, if we can do that in 45 minutes, like imagine the kind of change we could really create for ourselves if we felt like we could use this tool as well.
That's amazing. I love it. There was a question here. Hold on. Oh yeah. Well, and so what about those who maybe don't identify as singers? Do they have a different experience, or what do you notice in that for them?
Yeah. It's like dependent on the person, because I find some people have less obligation. So there's like a little bit of like, they're not worried about the rhythm. They're not worried about like the placement, right? Like there's like permission on that side. And for those that feel kind of like nervous to make sound, I also try to like build in, what's the word I'm looking for? Like stepping stones, basically. It's like, you don't have to sing words. You can start humming. Like humming will have a very big impact also on your vagus nerve, right? On calming your whole system. So it like works in two ways. You can sing on you can sing on ooh, you can make up your own. I kind of like made up this concept that I'm calling a song bath, which is like built around a sound bath, but it's like, I'll pick a song that's sort of like not really super active. And basically like the whole goal is to add your voice to the chorus of the song in any way that you want. So like if you feel called to sing along the bass line, you sing the bass line. If you feel called to sing exactly what they're singing, you do that. If you just want to hum, you do that. But like adding sound to sound that already exists and letting yourself just experience what it feels like in your body to make sound without the like restriction or holding back or checking who's listening, but like that the whole goal is just to see what it feels like to make sound.
Yeah. I mean, I see this so much for the perfectionists, those that are just so in their head when they're singing, that are struggling to let go and be present and be in flow and all of that, like that this would be such an incredible tool. And I thought too, from, transitioning from, only being a performer and then not really having the desire to sing, which is new to me. and then starting to have the desire to sing again. And then I come back to it and it's like, whoa, what is my relationship with my voice now? And
Totally.
I can see how that would really serve those maybe who stepped away during the pandemic or who are coming back to performing, how this would really serve a lot of people. And the word that keeps coming up to me as you're speaking is this word of rewilding. That's like, it's like coming back to just, I'm sure you do this with your 4-year-old all the time, but just the ease and the, not being self-conscious and just singing and expressing and, the thing that we kind of lose along the way.
Exactly. And it's like kind of mind blowing to me. I was thinking of like pieces that I might want to share with you. And what you just said is kind of like highlighting something for me, which is like, I also didn't sing for a long time publicly and even like on my own. Like I didn't have the desire to do it, even as I was teaching, especially like once I became like an authority on the voice. It felt like, oh God, if I put it out there, there's going to be like criticism. I should be doing it differently. And it just like the perfectionism sort of like crowded in around me. And it's so interesting that like going through this process of like returning to myself, who am I allowed to be? What does it look like to be me? What does it look like to be fully expressed? Moving through some stuff that I've moved through in my life. It was really interesting actually with Maria. I was in Mexico in June. We were on a retreat, and just to like say briefly, I had my thyroid removed this spring, which was very scary because it was literally like a direct the nerve that runs through the voice runs through the thyroid. And so it was like a really scary, like drop into the deep, what does this mean? How do you feel? What matters to you? And it really came clear for me, like the voice is a piece of me. This is like a really important piece of me. And so in Mexico, I had made this decision, like if I am able to sing 2 months later, I want to sing in this like beautiful location in like my in my full ownership of who I am, not worrying about the rules. I had something very specific. And I stood up and I sang and I let myself be moved by the nature that was around me. There were all these trees. We were in this jungle. You could see the ocean. I could see these people that I loved. I could feel my feet planted on the floor, like the kind of experience that we don't always get to have if we're standing on a stage. We're not always taking in all of these cues. And what happened with my voice was that it was so much more rich and dropped in and full, and like the life that I had lived, you could hear in my voice. Right. And I think that's the thing that sometimes we like lose sight of early on if we're training. And I know we don't need to go too far into the voice today, but it's like we lose sight of that the pieces of our life and the pieces that make us, if they come through in our voice or whatever it is that we're doing, it's like they're actually meant to come through in that way. And we're meant to be affected by our life and to bring that wisdom with us in whatever it is that we're doing.
What a magical healing experience that must have been.
It really was. And it felt like a reclamation too, to like stand there and say like, this is me. And that part of me that like, I haven't always wanted to share with people in this setting. But when you're in a circle, as I know you have experienced, with people that you trust implicitly and that know that part of you, it can just be so healing to like bring all pieces of you into that circle.
To be seen. Yeah. And so since then, have you found yourself singing more?
So I have. I think I mentioned to you, so I'm writing these sung meditations, which is like a bridge really between like the coaching work and the voice work. And so I've been working on them much more and just feeling like letting myself really be healed by them. And then actually 2 weeks ago, I just sang, it was my sister's wedding. And so I rewrote a song and sang that as my toast for her. But was also really cool was like, I got to like stand up and there in that room, like also share what I think of as like a transmission, right? Like it was like, I want to share my love for her and I can do it and her husband. and their, partnership. And I can do like, our voices are a way of being able to like share a piece of ourselves. And so I got to do that too, which also felt really gratifying, like on the other side of, this spring and everything that came from that.
Yeah. I love it. You said something to me in the Voxer that sort of is the reason that I went this direction in this way. When you talked about, I wish I could remember the exact words, but it was around like aging and like the aging voice or these things and how we don't allow ourselves to. And it's like these expectations, which is another way of saying what I just said, like these expectations to bounce back and be my pre-baby self, or to, be yourself pre-pandemic before your whole industry shut down for 2 years. And how, God, we can be so hard on ourselves. And so I didn't know if that's like where the mothering comes in. But also even just hearing you speak about, like allowing ourselves to change and to without fear, like I've lost something or I'm behind now, or anything come up around that.
Yeah. I think I will say, like, in my experience, as I've evolved into different like interests, I will say first, it did come with fear.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, right? Like, it's kind of terrifying to say, like, I knew this was my path, and now I'm going to suddenly say, like, actually, it's this thing. And by the way, all these people that know me as this, I'm going to become this other thing.
Yeah.
And also, like, a grief over, I thought I knew me. Like, I thought I knew exactly what I was supposed to do and what I was called to do. And what I think is really, like, I get like goosebumps in my hips just thinking about this. It's like, what's actually electrifying is like, being me means like I'm allowed to evolve. And like, how cool is it that we get to follow interests in a way that like are, there's that line from Passing Strange. I don't know if he says like, I woke up one day and I realized all my life decisions had been made by a 16-year-old. And it's like, yeah, like, what if me at 41 has a little bit more insight into what brings me alive fully? And what if like 16-year-old me was onto something? She just didn't have the whole picture yet. So like, how can I honor all of those different pieces of me and like give myself permission to grieve the parts that, feel like they die. Like I'll say when I called my parents and said like, I'm not going to audition anymore. It was a death. Like it was a full-fledged death. And I honestly, now thinking back on it, I 100% I'm like, if I had had nervous system regulation work and if I had been able to like honor the feelings that were there, I'm not sure it would have happened in the exact same way that it happened, but that's okay. It's like, it's also, I don't need to rewrite history. It's like it happened the way it was meant to happen because it happened. Like, but yeah, there's like this feeling, I think, I don't know, it's like moving into the next chapter, we don't necessarily know what it is or what it's meant to be. And I feel like there's a part of me that's like, yes, returning to like the fun loving self, that would be great. But I also feel like the more that like I have given myself permission to fully feel what's here, there's so much more joy. There's so much more pleasure. There's so much more possibility. And I think for me, I don't know if you feel the same way, but it's like part of that's because I'm like not really lying to myself about what's here. Like there's like an honesty about like, what is this chapter? What does this feel like? And then I can be really present versus for me in my 20s, my experience was like, there was a lot of like protection and there was a lot of like trying to like puff myself up versus saying like, I feel sad about this or this is frustrating, right? Like in this stage, it feels like I have the option of saying like, these are the things that are hard and here's how I'm going to navigate them. And I'm allowed to have like dark seasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
absolutely.
I feel like I wanted to have earlier in life, but I didn't know how to like claim them of like, it's okay that I'm moving through something really hard. And that's where we're at.
Oh, aren't you so grateful that that's shifted? I'm so grateful that I don't have to just keep saying positive affirmations every day.
Oh my God. Thank God. Thank God.
So, okay, you've let go of multiple dreams. And I'm going to do a solo podcast on this too, because I have this practice that I do with my clients that I want to share. So that's coming. Maybe it'll follow this one. But you've let go of multiple dreams. And I think even as a practice of imagining letting go of whatever the dream is extremely powerful. Because the people that I see suffer the most are the ones that think like, this has to happen. I will not be happy. I will not be safe. I will not have a good life if X doesn't happen. And that could be anything from career related, relationship related, family related, body related, right? Like the amount that we suffer when we really believe it has to go a certain way. And I wonder if there's a story or anything that you want to share around that.
Yeah. Well, so I know you've talked in some of your recent podcasts about a dark night of the soul. And I feel like for me, I related deeply. I finished listening to one and immediately Voxer do because I was like, oh my God. But all that you're saying is reminding me of like basically this time last year, it was maybe like one of the darkest periods that I have moved through. My husband and I were on a secondary fertility journey, and we were pregnant twice, and we're not pregnant now. And so we went through a lot of, we don't have a child now, second child. And I was so committed to making that dream happen. And honestly, I'm so proud of myself for how I showed up. We went through like fertility treatments and driving in and out of the city every day for years is a lot. And there was on the one hand, there was like a faith and belief in my body of like, if I just keep showing up, it's going to happen. I just have to follow the steps, listen to the doctors. I trusted my doctor, which was really lucky, or I was happy that that was the case. And what I really found in the journey of the pursuit that has not yet resulted in another child is surrender. Like I have never understood in my body the meaning of that word until this journey, because you sort of have to show up with a sense of like, I want this. You have to. Like you can do it the other way, but it'll just be like miserable. Like I honestly still felt happy and joyful and appreciative as I drove in and out of the city every morning. Like I would listen to a podcast, I would get inspired, I would like think about what I want to work on with my business. And I also was able to like be with my body in the sense of like when it was time to stop going in for those appointments, I felt so clear in my body. I felt so clear, like, if this is meant to happen, it's just not going to happen this way. And I've gotten really loud signals. And I let myself grieve that process. But I also, it's like really, I know it doesn't make sense to a lot of people, except for that if you're a dreamer, this will make sense to you. And if you've ever given up a dream, where it's like, I don't look back on that time and think, man, that was so miserable. What did I do that for? Like, what a waste. What a, like, all that time I could have got. Like, none of that is how I think of that time. I think, like, I'm so proud of myself that I showed up. I'm so proud of myself that I put my body and my heart and myself, and I like crowded resources around me to make sure that I felt held. I had friends and family and my husband, God, like the best of the best. And I just, it's like this feeling of, so many of us think it's like, it's only worth it if you get the dream.
Right.
And it's like, we're missing the whole point. Like you're missing the whole point. If it's only worth it if you achieve it, if it's only worth it if you achieve it, not like you shouldn't do it, but it's like so many dreams turn halfway through. They pivot, they become something else if you're paying attention. And it's like, you know, the age old, like it's not the destination, it's the journey. But it really is. It's like, if you're paying attention on the journey, it's okay to sort of notice like what, like how you feel in that process. Like if you just have like a death grip on getting the dream, it's like you're missing it. There's a potential to really like experience your life. And that like, yes, would I love to tell you that like we have a small child downstairs and this worked out in that way? Absolutely. Did I grieve and did I cry? Absolutely. This is not like something where I'm saying like, just tough it out and it's totally fine. But at the same time, I think like I learned so much about what life really is in that time and what it means to love deeply and what it means to show up for what you love or what you hope for and to feel genuine hope in my body. And then to trust myself when it was time to step off. And it's like, you can learn that. Like, honestly, yes, it would have been amazing. I'm never going to downplay that we want it. But it's like, if you can learn that from the process of going for a dream, whether or not you get it, you'll change your entire life. Like, I am a different person after that process.
Yeah. So when you were, I know this is going to be a question that people have, like, how was it little nudgings and whispers of like, I think maybe, or was it a big one day you woke up and like, we're done trying?
Yeah. It was nudgings. And I'll say that we did multiple different kinds of treatments, but the last two, we did IVF and we got pregnant with both of those. And after the first miscarriage, I thought to myself, like, I think this is too much. I think like something feels like I felt like something in my body and like some sort of divine hit was like, you should stop. And we did it again. We did a second round and then we had another miscarriage. And I was like, like there was a really strong signal that I didn't like, you know, you can convince yourself like, you're just like, oh, we're so close. You should just keep. But like the second time it was like, okay. And I knew there would be like questions where some people might say like, oh, you know, but you were so close. You could have just like one more time, like statistically. But it was so clear in my body. It was like, okay. And this is where I'm like, talk about like cultivating hope, the eternal optimist, where I'm like, I still believe it could happen. Like, I'm not like, you know, like there's a part of me that's like, if there is a soul and a baby that wants to come to our family, they're going to come.
Yeah.
And if they don't, that's okay too. Like there's so much love that I have to give that it's not like beholden on looking a certain way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Thanks for taking this journey with me.
Yeah. You know, I watched my best friend go through, it was a couple of years it took her to get pregnant. And what I had no idea before I watched her go through that, what it was on the body and the mind and the heart. I had no idea. And so just to like pause for a moment and really honor that, I just want to.
Thanks.
And then also the loss, like, yeah. Whew. I see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like to your point about like becoming a mother, it's like it cracked something open in me in like a whole other way. And it's like, you can't put that in a box. It's like there's like ripples of that love and even like the love that doesn't get to meet the human, but like that it deserves honoring. And that's what I want to do.
Yeah. Oh, and you are through your work, which I want to get to the mothering. But I want to say one more thing because I think the ability to a place where I see people suffer, and I'm curious if you went through any of this, is what we make that mean about us when we decide to put the dream down or we decide to shift or go in another direction. And that I think keeps us so stuck, whether we shift directions or not, is like, well, I failed. I'm not enough. If only I had. And I'm just curious, like, if you found that on your journey and how you moved through that.
Yeah. I'll say like my first instinct was to be like, anyone who thinks I failed, they don't know, right? It's like the puff up, the like brace, the protective. But it was really me worried, like, was this a failing? Like, did I? And in some level, it's like, it didn't happen. So like, let's honor that, like, that's true. But not that it was a failing, though. It's like, ultimately, something you just said, I feel like the way you said it, I wanted to say it back, but it's out of my head. Ultimately, it was like, if I'm being really honest, like the only way this is going to go into but the only way that I got through the fear of failure was to actually like love the heck out of myself for what I had shown up for. And to really be like, yeah, you did this. And to have my own back and to remember like you fully put your body, your mind, your spirit, like fully all in. And you know yourself well enough that you can trust yourself when it's time to step off something or step in a different direction. And the permission that I ultimately, and I feel like this is where like the deep dive of surrender really taught me, it was like, if I'm going to surrender to all of it, then I also need to love myself through this or else I'm going to drown. Like if I wasn't able to learn to meet myself fully with love in that moment, that's how people like, it takes you under. Of course. Yeah. How could it not? Right. And I feel like that's really the piece that like moving through those losses, the cancer this spring, it's like you learn. It's like, I think the whole point why we're here is to like learn how to love ourselves back into our truest version of ourselves and then to bring everyone with us. It's like, this isn't just for me. This is for all of us. And we're all meant to know how to do this and to really like, mother ourselves and to really meet ourselves with the kind of love that we hope to meet our children with. Because that changes us fundamentally. It's like, and not many of us were taught how to do that, not at the fault of anyone. Yeah. It's just like, it's not a skill that everyone was like, hey, by the way, learn to read and write. And also while you're here, you matter. And this would be helpful if you believe it yourself and not just coming from other people. Right.
Yeah. The amount of people that are, when I talk about this, self-love and we really get into it, it's like, yeah, but how? Like like the body doesn't even know how. Or I'll even talk to someone who has a child and it'll be like, well, how would you talk to them in this emotional upset or something? And it's still almost impossible in the first time for them to turn it towards themselves.
Yeah. It feels so unsafe.
Yeah. And it feels almost silly to some. Like, I don't like, it's like when somebody tells you you're beautiful, but you don't believe it. You're like, yeah. Like, but you won't listen, It's kind of like the same. You're like, I love you, little Annie. And you're like, moving on. Right. So, I think one of the language that I've been using so much this whole season because of the first guest in Soulful Ambition, Xavier Dagba, with his shadow work, he would talk about ultimately it's about not abandoning yourself. And again, I will have people sitting across the camera at me going, but what does that actually mean? And I feel like this is exactly what we're talking about. Is when we abandon ourselves and we're now pointing the finger of judgment back on ourselves for like, you're a failure. And we so desperately look outside of ourselves for proof that we're not. Like, somebody tell me I'm not a failure. Give me that lucky break. Get me the thing. So we cannot feel so bad. And then when we realize that there is a voice within us saying those things. And so I would love for you to share maybe a little more around this concept of mothering, especially that you use so that people could play with it today.
Yeah. Oh, so many things, so many ideas. Well, one, it's like, this is not around mothering, but it's just something you just said made me think. It's like when we have a fear that someone else is thinking something about us, it's actually our fear. And it's like, if we can get really clear on that, it's like, this is actually a thought from me. It's like, oh, my mom thinks this about me. It's like, maybe, but something is like echoing that you are worried and you have that fear. So the idea of like, I have so many thoughts of where I could take this, but ultimately, one, I feel like, sorry, I wanted to go like 3 different places there. It's like to really meet ourselves with mothering energy means to give ourselves permission to nurture ourselves. And nurture isn't really something that we think of for how we interact with ourselves. Like, we're really quick to beat ourselves up. We're really quick to, say the things we did wrong. We're really quick to like own our mistakes. And it feels almost like dangerous if we were just to say like, well, I needed someone to say I was doing the right thing there. And no one was there to do that. So instead, I'm just going to say everything that I was doing wrong. And the idea of mothering ourselves is really like learning how to nurture like boldly in a way that's like, it actually matters more than just like, it's like, it seems like something that you would just see like on an Instagram, like graphic, like mother yourself, right? But it's like, no, like to boldly claim that like in each situation where I might be looking for external validation, and you know, it's like a sad truth is that anyone who has a mother is probably not going to have a mother for their entire life. This is like kind of the dark side of my brain. But it's like, this is not like, even if you have the most loving mother in the world, at some point you will need to learn this skill for yourself. So what if we learned it even before we had to go through that rite of passage, right? Which is like my, you know, I don't want to go down that path. But I think that's like a piece where we need to learn how to ask what we need from ourselves and answer honestly. That's like really at the heart of the whole process, right? Like, what do I need? And not in a way where we have to qualify our needs. Like, I need sleep because I didn't, you know, fill in the blank, or like, I really need a hug because I'm feeling, it's like, yeah, what if like we actually had a practice for connecting to our own needs in a way where we honored them from the first hit? Because honestly, like almost every time I ask someone what they need and they drop into their body, they're very clear what they need. They just don't think they're allowed to ask for it.
Also, do you find, I mean, if they haven't dropped into their body yet, so if you're listening to this and you just ask yourself right now, what do I need? It's often something very surface level or even external. And then I 100% agree. When somebody's dropped in, it's so clear. It's usually like a word or two.
Yeah.
It often can bring up emotion. And talk a little bit about that, like making space or time to do this, right? Like to stop and listen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, it's like, why does this matter, right? It's kind of like the question of like, why would it matter to make space for this? It's like, how do I want to live the rest of my life? Do I want to live the rest of my life punishing myself or defending or, right? Like, so just kind of like as a baseline that like, it's optional. But what if every day I checked in and said, how do I feel? What do I need? Like, what if anytime I feel a signal coming up in my body, anytime I'm like picking a fight with my husband, or anytime my son is screaming in the background, or anytime I'm worried about the post I'm going to share on Instagram, what if before I did that and before I looked for all the external ways, what if I just asked like, that's interesting. What do I need? Doesn't mean you're not going to like proceed with any of those scenarios, but really like getting very cued in. If there's a strong, loud signal alarm bell coming from inside, what do I need? And if it feels like surface level or unclear, what might that be telling me? Yeah. Right. So if it's like, I need chips, cool. What might that be telling me? Right. Like, or I need to yell at him. Like, I need to like let it out. I need him to know. Yeah. What might that be telling me? Yeah. Like, what's the need really under the need? And you could just keep going. If it feels like I'm still sort of surface level, what might that be telling me? What's under that?
I love that question. What might that be telling me? It's really beautiful. This is such a silly little example, but I think it's really tangible of like, when I'm going through a self-conscious in my body day, it is so interesting to notice like the way if my husband walks by me in the kitchen and touches me in a certain way, how I react. And for so long when I wasn't so cued in to what was going on in my body, I would make it so surface level and so like, it's this and this and this. And now I can turn to him and go, I'm just feeling really bad today. Like, and it's life changing. It's relationship changing.
Totally. Right. Like your connection is so different, I'm sure.
And he's been saying to me probably for the last 2 years off and on, like, thank you so much for the deep work you're doing. Thank you for the deep work you're doing.
Yeah.
And so it really, it's so impactful, and it ripples out and it ripples out. And then when you think about, I know everyone listening to this podcast has deep desires and wants to make an impact on this world. And living the other way, like it's going to hinder what we're really here to do so much. So I wanted to highlight that. And then also I have to say these words that you said again, because I love them so much. And they're like the title of a book or a website or something, which is Nurture Boldly.
Mm.
Woman, that is good.
Yeah. I'm like, who said that?
That was you. Nurture boldly. That is so different. And I love that because you're so right. Like, I need to mother myself sounds like a pale pink background Instagram post, right? And it's lovely. And that's the kind of thing that I would hear and I would say like, oh, that's nice. And I'd probably move on. But this idea of nurturing boldly really makes me stop and think. I'd like to be that bold, to really give myself what I need. And especially when other people really need me too. That's a whole other thing, right?
That's right.
But, yeah.
And the idea, just piggyback on myself too, is like the nurture piece of it. For some reason, I'm sure you run into this all the time. It's like people have a story of like, when I take care of myself, it's selfish. Like if I'm in self-care, it's selfish, whatever it is. And there's something around like nurture though, that's like, don't we all deserve, like, isn't like, if we just like, there's so much around like the inner child and like the caring for the human at the center of, and it's like you would view your husband as deserving of nurture. You would view your children of it. And it's like, if we can really claim that for ourselves, it's like, that will change the entire game.
And the question that you brought up in response to mine of like, what makes this important to do? And I really feel like I don't have time to not do this kind of work anymore. It's not how can I carve out time? And my life is fuller than it has ever been.
Same.
And stopping to go within is 100% essential.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally, I feel like my life would not be what it is right now without this work. Like it literally, I would not be who I am. My family would not be running in the way that it is running, right? Like I wouldn't, everything. It ripples out to everything. Yeah, 100% agree.
So good. I want to talk to you for another hour and yet. For those that have their interest piqued and are curious about working with you and what you do, where can they find you?
So you can follow me on Instagram at Expressed Life, EXPRESSED Life, or expressedlife.com.
Amazing. And I'll, of course, have those links below. And also, I'm just going to say it here, plant that seed again. Like I would love to collaborate in some way.
Oh my God.
I think that we'd have a really great time. So make sure you're signed up for the email list and all of that, so you'll know when that's happening and how. And thank you so much for sharing your heart and your work and your stories. And it's really stunning to see your transitions and what you're doing and how you continue to evolve. And I'm excited to know you now and continue to watch what's next.
Me too. And thank you so much for having me on and for this conversation and for the work that you do. I've been inspired by you for a really long time. So this is really a dream come true for me and so exciting.
Thank you so much. All right. We'll be back here next time on the Soulful Ambition podcast. If this served, please like this, subscribe, share it with a friend. You can always leave a review, which is like tips to a podcaster, and greatly appreciated. And we will see you back here. Soulful Ambition. Mwah.